First of all, thanks, Frank, for that. I'll pay you later. Good morning, everybody. My name is Helena Power. I'm currently working as a community development worker with Kilkenny Traveller Community Movement. And I'm also a very proud member of the Irish Traveller community. Listening to the previous speaker and the injustice and stuff that them and other members of the community internationally face is very emotive, especially having so much commonalities with all groups. I suppose I was born in Kilkenny. I grew up in Urlingford in the north of the county. I went to primary school in Urlingford and on to secondary school in Johnstown, where I completed both my junior and leaving certificate. Following on from finishing school, I went on to qualify as a beauty therapist. However, after having my son, I decided to start volunteering heavily with my local traveller organisation. I had been involved when I was younger, as my brother was working in the KTCM, and it was something that I was really interested in. I suppose after having my son, it put things into perspective for what was happening in my community, and I couldn't stand back any longer and allow the injustices, discrimination, marginalisation and isolation to continue without standing up and speaking out against it. I wanted to, and I still do want to improve the current situation so that the next generation won't have to go through what the last 40 years of travelling people have had to. For anybody who doesn't know the history of Irish travellers, I'm going to give you a brief overview. We are Ireland's only Indigenous minority, which came about after decades of advocating by traveller groups on the 1st of March 2017. Irish travellers split off from the general population around the mid-1600s, and from DNA comparisons that have been done, it has been proved that we are genetically different to a settled Irish person to the same degree as somebody from Spain. Based on the 2016 census, there was 30,987 travellers in Ireland. Personally, I believe that this is much higher. Over 54% of the community are under 24 years of age, and in all indicators, including health, education and employment, travellers are considerably lower on every aspect. Infant mortality rate is 4 times higher. Life expectancy is 11 to 15 years earlier for a traveller compared to a settled counterpart. 50% of travellers die before they reach their 39th birthday, and 70% fail to live past 59 years old. Suicide rates are 6 to 7 times higher. I'm just going to pause there for a minute just to let that sink in. These statistics are from the All Ireland Traveller Health Study, which was done in 2010, which is now 12 years ago. And as a member of the community, I can say without a second thought that these stats have gotten worse. There's a pandemic of suicide within our community. 28% of travellers leave school before the age of 13, and travellers are 50 times more likely to leave school without a leaving cert. 80% of travellers are unemployed, with much of the remaining 20% self-employed. And these statistics are just the tip of the iceberg. And I'm conscious that they're just that. They're just numbers. They don't consider the daily lived experiences of travellers and the socially accepted anti-traveller hatred, which is a constant in daily life in Irish society. Since the 1963 Commission on Itinerance Act, the Irish state has been trying to assimilate the traveller community into settled people. The institutional racism is ongoing. In the early hours of the 10th of October 2015, a fire broke out at a halting site in South County Dublin. 5 adults, including a pregnant mother, and 5 children lost their lives. For a moment, travellers felt a sense of belonging. Books of condolences were being filled, sports events held a moment's silence, and flags were flown at half-mast. The strained relationship with the settled community was put to one side, and we all felt unified within our grief. It was unfortunately short-lived. While the immediate outpouring of grief was widespread, the bouquets soon turned to boulders when the local authority proposed to home the remaining members of the family on a council-owned site behind the housing estate. The local residents objected and blocked access to the site with their cars. After entering negotiations with the residents on the 21st of October, while funeral services were still ongoing, the local authority gave in to the residents. The bereaved family were accommodated at a public car park with no water or storage facilities. For a lot of people, it was a sad but also a shocking outcome to a series of events reflecting many of the issues regarding racism and discrimination for travellers today. So even after going through the tragedy of losing 10 family members and an unborn child, the discrimination was still so openly carried out. In 1998, the Housing Act required each local authority to consultate, prepare, adopt and implement 5-year traveller-specific accommodation plans, which were supposed to meet the existing and projected need of travellers in their area. There was also an obligation on the local authority to provide traveller-specific accommodation, which is culturally appropriate housing for travellers. This will consist of group housing schemes, halting sites or transient sites. In 2021, last year, reports began to emerge which showed astonishing figures. Over a 10-year period, there was an underspend of 58 million on traveller accommodation. Only 2/3 of the money allocated to the local authorities to spend on traveller accommodation was drawn down. I think those figures speak volumes in terms of the lack of will by those involved with trying to improve the accommodation needs for travellers. In 2002, the anti-trespass law, which was brought in, essentially meant that travellers couldn't travel, and as nomadic people, it was an extremely hard pill to swallow. Our culture was being ripped away from us, and nobody seemed to care, want to help, or speak out to say what was happening was wrong. 39% of travellers are living in overcrowded accommodation, and there's a massive hidden homeless problem. When put into standard accommodation, the majority of travellers end up returning to sites or group housing schemes to family because of the marginalisation and isolation that they feel. And I think it's important not to underestimate the power of isolation and marginalisation. If I asked anyone sitting here today to move into a traveller site, to be thrown into a world and a way of life that is completely alien to them and completely different than what they were brought up in, how many would do it, or how long do you think it'd last? Just for a second, think how that would make you feel. Well, that's exactly what society is asking travellers to do. There are a few Irish travellers that have become household names, such as Eileen Flynn, Cindy Joyce, Paddy Doherty, Hughie Motton, Rosaleen McDonough, Finbar Fury, Andy Lee, John Evan and Tyson Fury, to name a few. The people I've named are politicians, athletes, activists, musicians, playwrights and TV personalities, but they are also all travellers. But that isn't all they are. There's so much diversity within the traveller community that people don't get to see or engage in conversations with because they let stereotypes and labels get in the way. People sometimes refer to me as a settled traveller, and I've often been asked, how can you be a traveller if you've never travelled? I always reply the same thing. You don't have to live in a trailer or a caravan to be a traveller. You don't have to love horses to be a traveller. And you don't have to get married and leave school to be a traveller. Being a traveller is about what's in your heart. It's your core value and principles and culture. It's, as I previously mentioned, your DNA. It's your blood and it's what's running through your veins. It makes you who you are. Travellers are the most strongest, resilient people that I know, and in a world where discrimination towards travellers is still socially acceptable, travellers are starting to educate themselves and are beginning to speak out and stand up against what their community faces. This, along with the experience of activists and allies, is what I believe and hope will improve the lives of future generations. Thank you for your time.